Even those of us who don't know much about cars understand that there's a difference between a classic vintage automobile and a rusty old banger. We can understand a rusty old banger being abandoned by its owner because it no longer has any value. We find it far harder to understand why a beautiful old vintage car would be left behind and allowed to gather rust. We know that it happens though, and we have plenty of shocking examples to show you in this video. The most common place for a car to become abandoned is a barn or a garage. The owners park their cars with the intention of repairing or refurbishing them, and then they never get around to it. That's how this distinctive-looking 1968 Chevrolet Corvette drag car got left inside a barn in Highwood, Illinois, USA, for 20 years until gaining its freedom in August 2019. The owner never confirmed why it had been abandoned, but based on the pictures, the car was in a good state of repair, and the MPG Racing 454 V8 engine was still in running condition. The interior might need a little work if you're planning on using it for anything other than drag racing, though. Most of it's been gutted, and that wiring looks more than a little suspect to us. We definitely want a qualified engineer to take a look before we tried to drive it anywhere. While the owner might not have been able to explain his strange decision to lock his car away from the world for 2 decades, at least he passed it on for a reasonable price. The buyer picked it up for just $6,000. Bargain. While the Chevrolet looks like it survived the passing of time mostly unscathed in its Illinois barn, the same cannot be said for this extremely rare aluminum alloy Jaguar XK120. Perhaps we should allow it a little leeway, though. It wasn't in great condition when it went into the barn, and that was in 1969. A 19-year-old woman had bought the old Jag as a restoration project on her birthday. 50 years later, she finally accepted that she was never going to get around to it and offered it up for sale. It found its way into a collector who was able to confirm that it was built on January 11, 1950, and even managed to obtain a Jaguar Heritage certificate for the vehicle. That didn't get him any closer to getting it up and running, though. The engine and gearbox were missing after allegedly being taken to be used in the previous owner's speedboat. And the chassis is clearly going to need a lot of work. Hopefully, the new owner won't take another 50 years to think about getting started. The Back to the Future movies aren't the only reason that DeLorean cars became popular, but they certainly gave the brand a big helping hand. And there was a spike in sales after the first film. That film came out in 1985, and this DeLorean was parked in a barn in 1986. You see the connection? After it was parked, it stayed inside the barn under an increasingly thick layer of dust for the next 32 years. When it was eventually discovered again, it was found that every single feature on the vehicle was original, and its broken door handle meant that the inside hadn't been touched by anyone or anything since the year it was parked. When the dust came off, the car immediately started to look as good as new. It had to be taken to a mechanic as a precaution, but it was fully functional, and it started up the same day it was sold to its new owner. DeLoreans are only going to become more valuable as time goes on. It's thought that there are only around 5,000 left in the world now, and that number goes down every year. Our next barn find is particularly puzzling because it's obvious that someone once loved this old Packard so much that they had it extensively customized and modified. At one point, it would have been a humble 1941 Packard 90, which would still have been a rare and valuable car to find in the 21st century, but it's been adapted into an open-top bus. That makes it so unique that it's almost certainly one of a kind. The fact that it fits inside a barn at all is pretty amazing. The Packard is now 20 feet long and comes with space for up to 12 people to ride as passengers with the driver. If it rains, there's a roll-out canvas roof that covers the whole length of the vehicle and ensures that nobody gets wet. You might not get a huge amount of power or acceleration out of the 356 Flathead 8 engine under the hood, but power isn't the objective of this unique car. Finding it a new owner might be tricky as it has few practical uses. but it'd make an excellent museum piece somewhere. While our next car is definitely beautiful, it would also be accurate to describe it as notorious. That's because it was once owned by Uday Hussein, son of Iraqi dictator Saddam. Like his father, Uday didn't survive the most recent American-led military conflict in the country, and many of his more valuable personal possessions vanished in the aftermath. This Ferrari F40 was one of them. It was eventually tracked down by a journalist several years later and found to be in the hands of a network of gangsters and criminals. One of the gangsters informed the journalist, who was posing as a potential buyer, that the car was taken from Iraq to Turkey to keep it hidden until the heat died down. It was then brought back 4 years later with false registration plates. Documentation that was shown to the journalist proves that it's the same car, and it's now up for sale on the black market. You'd need deep pockets to acquire it, though. The price quoted to the journalist was $1 million. It's a stunning Ferrari, but we don't think it's worth that much. While you might find a few Citroën DS's for sale today with a quick search of the internet, you'll find precious few that haven't been refurbished, renovated, or otherwise altered in some way. The one you're looking at right now, a DS from 1965, is all original, and that's what makes it so rare and valuable. It's one of the very last DS19 models to roll off the factory production line and was bought by a French plumber. He drove it every day until he had a small crash in the 1970s, after which he stashed it in his barn and planned to repair it. He didn't get around to the repairs, and the slightly damaged Citroën stayed in his garage for the next 40 years. What makes it even rarer than the average DS19 is its hydraulic gearbox, which appears on only 40 cars. These pictures of the vehicle make it obvious that at least some repair and restoration work will have to be carried out by its new owner. But hopefully, the repairs can be done without replacing any of the original features. While we're talking about Citroëns, the name Maurice A. Julien might be familiar to Citroën enthusiasts. He was instrumental in the creation of the Citroën Traction Avant, and in 1947, he also came up with the Julien MM5 2VC, a bold, experimental vehicle that was born out of the more avant-garde style that emerged during the post-war years of the 1940s. It's not a well-known vehicle, or even a well-remembered one, but its creation involved the filing of several patents, including the unique group engine gearbox axle fixing. Hardly any of the cars still exist today, but this red one has been protected by virtue of being part of the Michael Grossegoat collection for many years. Even with that protection, it's missing its hood and windows. But the 310cc four-stroke single-cylinder engine is still in place and still runs. It might not offer you much in the way of protection on a wet or windy day, but it's one of the most innovative and original-looking budget cars to come from the 1940s. And when it went to auction, it sold for a bargain price of $15,000. Let's go back to looking at American cars now and talk about Dodge Daytonas. Specifically, this 1969 Dodge Daytona, which spent 45 whole years in storage before seeing the light of day again in April 2020. Only 503 units of this vehicle were ever built, and if it weren't for the NASCAR homologation process of 1969, none would exist at all. This is a car that was created for the track, not for the road. Curiously, we don't know where this unit was between 1969 and 1974. There are no records of it anywhere, and its second ever owner has no idea. He says it turned up on a used car lot in New Jersey without a backstory or any further information, but did have 37,000 miles on the clock. The first thing he did was have it resprayed blue from its original green. He quickly found that it wasn't suited to be his daily driver. It was too loud, the engine was too hard to start, and it consumed way too much fuel. That means the Dodge got parked up a few months after it was bought and never moved again. What a waste. By this point, you're probably starting to accept that people are willing to leave almost any car in the darkness of a barn for decades. But it's still surprising to hear that the same is true even of classic Porsches. Here it is. It's a 1961 356B Super 1600 T5, and it's all original. The Barfine discovery was made by Andy from SoCal Imports after he received a tip from another classic car enthusiast. When he went to pick it up, he was delighted to find out the car came with a bonus in the shape of a dual set of Zenith carburetors. Everything about the shape of the vehicle screams vintage classic, and Andy is in two minds about what to do with it. Part of him wants to repaint the exterior and get it looking shiny and new, but another part of him has fallen in love with its patina shell. Giving this car a valuation is almost impossible. Porsches of this vintage turn up very rarely on the market, and even if they do turn up, they're seldom in original condition. And it's even rare that they're this complete. You can't always deduce the value of a car by sight. A Porsche is always going to have value, but how many people would look at a muddy 1980 Ford Fairmount EV and put a value of $1 million on it? We know that sounds absurd, but someone tried to do precisely that in early 2019, even though the car requires a full set of 18 6-volt batteries attaching to it to make it run, and it doesn't come with any. The sales listing for the vehicle prompted a bemused reaction online, with the majority of commentators assuming that the seller was joking about the price. They were even more sure it was all a joke when the seller stated that he would charge $500 just for the right to view it in person. His reasoning was that it's rare, and it might one day become a museum piece. It appears that he eventually came to his senses, and when he finally parted with the Fairmount, he did so for $50,000. That's still a lot of money for a car that most people wouldn't look twice at if it passed them on the street. Those of you who really know your cars will have heard of the AMC Matador and the AMC Pacer. But our next car is even rarer than that. It's a gorgeous, yellow supercar from the 1970s, and it's one of only 5 that were ever made. One of them turned up in a barn in Michigan in November 2019. Built by the legendary Bizzarini, this is the AMC AMX3. It's almost certainly the only one of the 5 cars to have a 390 engine fitted under the hood, which was apparently a request made by the mysterious, nameless original owner. The full history of the car is an enigma. It's said that it was sold around the Midwest several times but hardly spent any time out on the road. It might now finally be able to get that chance. After being sold in early 2020, it's now in the hands of a proud new owner who hopes to knock the dust and dirt off it, tune up that old engine, and get it performing as AMC originally imagined that it would. You probably have 2 questions on your mind as you look at pictures of this Sanford Type S cycle car. The first is, what is a Sanford Type S cycle car? And the next is, how did it get into such a battered state? The answer to the first question is that cycle cars were briefly popular in Europe between 1910 and 1920 as a cheaper alternative to larger automobiles. Often they used motorcycle engines to power them. The Sanford Type S is a French build. The answer to the first question is unknown. It seems likely that someone attempted to restore the vehicle several years ago, but botched the work and then abandoned it. We know that because the hood and frontage are made of steel, whereas the rest of the body is still the original aluminum. The earliest known registration of this car was in August 1951, when it was registered as a 9977 AM75, and it was then re-registered by a well-known classic car collector, Roger Ballion, in 1967. Its history before 1951 is unknown. So whoever acquired it for $70,000 in 2015 didn't just get a classic car, they also bought themselves a mystery to solve.